Good afternoon. I'm Alvin Bragg, Manhattan District Attorney. I'm honored and privileged to be joined by Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch. First and foremost, I want to extend my deepest condolences to Mr. Thompson's loved ones and colleagues. His family deserves our respect as they continue to grieve. Our work will never be able to undo the fact that a life was lost. We are here to announce that Luigi Mangione, the defendant, is charged with 1 count of murder in the first degree and 2 counts of murder in the second degree, including 1 count of murder in the second degree as an act of terrorism for the brazen, targeted, and premeditated shooting of Brian Thompson, who, as you know, was the CEO of United Healthcare. This case was made possible by the collaborative efforts of the phenomenal public servants you see before you today, and so many others who are not here. I'm honored to lead the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and privileged to serve alongside Assistant District Attorneys Joel Seidman, Kristen Bailey, and Zachary Kaplan, who were working from the outset, hand in hand, with the greatest police department in the world. The chief of our trial division, Lisa Del Pizzo, and the deputy chief, Chris Prefos, provided sage oversight and direction. And I want to acknowledge our high technology analysis unit. There was a lot to be processed here. Steve Moran, in particular, who heads that, and Marco Popic. We are privileged here at the DA's office to work every day with the phenomenal public servants at the NYPD. It has been a distinct pleasure to work besides Commissioner Tisch, an exemplary partner, and Chief of Detectives Joseph Kinney. Almost every day we're in touch, and his leadership is second to none. And then Deputy Commissioner Rebecca Weiner, who, as I tell her, there are a lot of challenging things happening in the world, and I sleep better at night knowing that she is the Deputy Commissioner in charge of terrorism. The detectives on this, out doing the courageous frontline work, Detective Oscar Diaz, Detective Curcio, exemplary, the finest. It wasn't just those of us here in New York. I want to acknowledge the great work of our partners in Altoona, the Altoona Police Department, the Blair County District Attorney's Office, the governors of New York and Pennsylvania, the FBI, and of course, the brave members of the public who answered the call when our great commissioner put out the call for their assistance. This was a frightening, well-planned, targeted murder that was intended to cause shock and attention and intimidation. It occurred in one of the most bustling parts of our city, threatening the safety of local residents and tourists alike, commuters and business people just starting out on their day. Let me say a bit more about the charges. They include 1 count of murder in the first degree as a killing in furtherance of terrorism, 2 counts of murder in the second degree, 1 charging that the killing was done as an act of terrorism, and the second pertaining to the fact that the killing was intentional. The maximum penalty possible for murder in the first degree and murder in the second degree as an act of terrorism is life without parole. The maximum penalty for murder in the second degree is 25 years to life. There are additional counts as well. A number of criminal possession of weapon charges, 2 counts in the second degree, 4 counts in the third degree, 1 count in the fourth degree, and a count of criminal possession of a forged instrument in the second degree. Let me tell you a bit about the facts. On November 24th, we allege that the defendant arrived in New York City to murder Brian Thompson. After the defendant arrived in New York City on a bus at Port Authority, he checked into the hostel on the Upper West Side using the name Mark Rosario with a fake New Jersey ID. On the morning of December 4th, the defendant left the hostel, just after 5:30 a.m. and traveled to Midtown. For nearly an hour, we allege the defendant waited in the area near the Hilton Hotel, waiting for Mr. Thompson to appear. From 6:38 a.m. to 6:44 a.m., The defendant stood across from the entrance of the hotel on West 54th Street. When he saw Mr. Thompson, he crossed the street and approached him from behind. We allege he then took out a 9mm 3D printed ghost gun, equipped with a 3D printed suppressor, and shot him once in the back and once in the leg. The defendant then fled northeast on 54th Street and took an e-bike uptown before getting into a taxi that took him to West 178th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. On December 9th, the defendant was spotted at McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania. The local police were notified, he was arrested, and he was found with a 9mm handgun, a suppressor, 2 ammunition magazines, and the same fake New Jersey ID he used at the hostel. I want to say a word about ghost guns. These weapons are increasingly proliferating throughout New York City and the entire country. Involving technology will only make this problem worse. Last year, over 80 ghost guns and ghost gun parts were recovered in Manhattan alone. The NYPD and the Manhattan DA's office have been leading in the interdiction of these ghost guns. And one thing I want to make clear, they're unserialized, they can be printed out, but as this case tragically makes clear, they are just as deadly as traditional firearms. This will remain a priority for us here in Manhattan. Finally, I know there have been questions about the extradition process. The latest that I can offer you is that the defendant is currently scheduled to appear in court in Pennsylvania on Thursday morning, first for a preliminary hearing on his Pennsylvania charges. Immediately to follow that will be an extradition hearing. We have indications that the defendant may waive that hearing, in which case he'd be brought to New York forthwith. In any event, we have been preparing on parallel paths, and before the hearing, we'll send to the governor of the state of New York the paperwork that would be necessary if he does not waive during that hearing. I now want to turn over to our great commissioner, and when I do so, I wanted to thank her for her partnership, not only on this matter, but on all we do every day together. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. The unsealing of today's indictment brings us one step closer to securing justice for Brian Thompson and his family and affirming the primacy of the rule of law in the city of New York. NYPD detectives worked tirelessly to piece this case together, and along the way, the Manhattan DA's office made sure we had every legal tool available to us. Whether quickly providing subpoenas to assist with our evidence collection, or traveling with us to Altoona, Pennsylvania last week after the apprehension, our partnership made this a successful investigation. So I'd like to thank District Attorney Bragg and his team for their work in bringing this case forward. Part of that work included the relentless collection and analysis of surveillance video by our detectives, which ultimately produced a clear image of our suspect. That image was shared far and wide through the media, and thanks to an observant McDonald's customer and the employee who alerted the police, Mr. Mangione was quickly brought into custody. This outcome is why we always emphasize the critical role of the public in our public safety mission. So again, I want to thank everyone who saw something, said something, and did something. That is why we have a suspect in custody today. As DA Bragg said, Luigi Mangione is now formally charged and indicted for murder. And let me be perfectly clear. In the nearly 2 weeks since Mr. Thompson's killing, we have seen a shocking and appalling celebration of cold-blooded murder. Social media has erupted with praise for this cowardly attack. People ghoulishly plastered posters threatening the other CEOs, with an X over Mr. Thompson's picture, as though he was some sort of a sick trophy. And yesterday, the New York Post reported that some extreme activists were circulating a deck of cards with other most wanted CEOs to be targeted for assassination. These are the threats of a lawless, violent mob who would trade in their own vigilantism for the rule of law that protects us all. Let me say this plainly. There is no heroism in what Mangione did. This was a senseless act of violence. It was a cold and calculated crime that stole a life and put New Yorkers at risk. We don't celebrate murders, and we don't lionize the killing of anyone. And any attempt to rationalize this is vile, reckless, and offensive to our deeply held principles of justice. Now, as we await the extradition process in Pennsylvania to complete, we continue our public safety work here at home.
Luigi Mangione, now charged with first-degree murder in the killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. A New York grand jury indicting him on what is a rare and serious charge in the state of New York. This specific way that they're using first degree is typically reserved for cases involving the killing of police officers or first responders and for serial killers. And it comes as a prison official tells our Jason Carroll that Mangione has met with his New York defense attorney, Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, visiting Mangione on Friday in the Pennsylvania prison where he's being held. We're also learning that his family still has not visited him. In fact, Mangione has not had any visitors except for his attorneys. Danny Freeman is out front, outside the prison in Huntington, Pennsylvania. And Danny, you're learning new information about what Mangione's life, what these days have been behind prison walls as he now faces these major new charges tonight.
Yeah, that's right, Aaron. We have updated information about Luigi Mangione's interactions with the outside world since he's been in prison, or better said, the outside world's attempt to interact with him since he's been behind bars behind me. As of today, per a spokesperson for the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, we've learned that Mangione has received 157 entries or deposits into his prison commissary account. We also learned that as of this morning, he's received 33 emails and 6 pieces of mail. Aaron, that's up from the just 2 pieces of hard mail that we reported he received as of last night. And still, like you noted, Aaron, the only visitors, though, he's had behind these bars has been his attorneys so far. And this again comes all after those blockbuster new charges were announced in New York earlier this afternoon. As you noted, the Manhattan DA officially announcing that new indictment on first-degree murder charges in New York, and also by a grand jury indicted for murder of the second degree as a crime of terrorism. DA Alvin Bragg saying clearly this was a killing intended to invoke terror. Now, on Thursday morning, Aaron, that's when we're going to see the next step of these proceedings involving Mangione. It's going to be here in Pennsylvania. He's scheduled to have 2 hearings back-to-back, one on those Pennsylvania charges, then the other one right after on extradition. According to CNN's Kara Scannell, we do now expect him to waive that extradition and to go voluntarily to New York. That's according to his attorney. And if that's the case, a prison spokesperson, Aaron, tells us that he could leave Pennsylvania right from that courthouse after that proceeding, if that is in fact what ultimately happens. So this story, at least the Pennsylvania portion of this story, not quite done yet. But again, we're learning more about his life here before he likely ultimately heads back to New York. Aaron?
Absolutely. All right, Danny, thank you very much. And all of that, significant detail there from Danny's reporting. Joey Jackson joins me now, criminal defense attorney. So, Joey, okay, I want to get your reaction to some of the details that Danny had there. First, though, when he's talking about the charges, first-degree murder, to some, just, you look at this and you go, a guy comes and assassinates someone on the street on video in the streets of New York. That's first degree. But it actually, in New York State, things are different. It was second degree.
Yes.
They get to first degree because they say that this was intended to terrorize.
Yes.
And so do you think this is a very, very high bar, right? I guess it means he can never, life without parole, no way around it. Is the DA going to get a conviction on that?
So this is what they're doing. What DAs generally do is they charge, number one, the conduct that's relevant to the offense. And number two, they charge what they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. It's an open question as to a conviction. And I say that even notwithstanding the compelling evidence. This is a guy who's seen as a deity. They're calling him Saint Luigi, right? Do you get a jury who buys into the notion of the healthcare industry being so disruptive to the common person that this person deserved this, right? I'm speaking about the CEO who died. Yeah. So, could you get a jury to nullify? Could you get a jury that's hung? I mean, the evidence is really compelling. I doubt it. If you base it on the evidence and the facts alone, the question is no, at least to this point. He deserves the presumption of innocence. We're not at trial yet, but from the public disclosure of the evidence, I think it's pretty damning. But I think what the prosecutor prosecutor's doing is saying, we're going to look at motivation. Remember, Aaron, you never have to show motive of a crime. You just have to show that the crime was committed. In this instance, to the extent that you're charging terrorism, now you get to the motivation, the manifesto, the hatred of corporate America. All of that becomes admissible and relevant evidence.
All right. So what do you make of the what Danny's reporting? 33 emails, 6 actually hard mails. That's odd to think about what those would be. 157 deposits for the commissary. I guess that's people giving him money, basically, to buy food in the prison. When you look at all those things, does anything stand out to you?
It does. I mean, the fact of the matter is that he struck a raw chord. If you listen to people who are on social media speaking about him, there's a hatred of the healthcare industry.
Yeah.
And he picked a face of an industry. You're looking at United Healthcare, largest, they insure 1 in 7 people. And so who are you going to target but them?
Yeah.
And I think that's what functioned into the DA's charge of the first-degree murder for terrorism. Clearly, he had a message.
Quickly before we go, police were talking about his mother, and when they had talked to her about whether it was her son, they had a conversation where she didn't indicate that it was her son in the photograph. They'd reached out when the San Francisco Police Department said, hey, this looks like him, hadn't found him yet. They reached out to her because she'd filed the missing persons report. She didn't indicate it was him in the photograph, but she did say it might be something she could see him doing.
Well, that's troubling and problematic, and it raises the question morally, right? Whether she could have had any intervention to prevent this. Did she know that he was turning this dark, right? Indications are, though, Aaron, that he'd been out of touch with the family since July, and there had been a break with respect to the communication. But if you know something like that, maybe you get someone help and treatment or do something else other than allow them to engage in this behavior.
Right.
But the people, I've never seen social media reaction that is so on a person's side who committed just a blatant murder.
Yeah. All right, Joey, thank you very much.
And Stacey, your take on the extradition, do these new charges, first-degree murder and terrorism, does that change any of this?
It really doesn't. What's going to happen when he appears in Pennsylvania, if he goes forward and waives or consents to extradition, I should say, then New York law enforcement will already likely be in the courtroom in Pennsylvania. He'll be processed out of the Pennsylvania system. He'll still have a hold from the pending charges in Pennsylvania, which will wait out indefinitely while New York addresses its case. And they'll transport him right back to New York and get him into an arraignment in front of the New York Supreme Court criminal, which is for felony indictments. The indictment is already handed up by the grand jury. They'll present him with that indictment and his attorney, and undoubtedly he'll enter a not guilty plea. But there's something I really want to point out here, which is highly unusual, and it's my opinion that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has a bit overreached in this indictment. They were originally going to go forward with a murder 2 charge against Luigi Mangione, which is just having the defendant having the intent to cause death of another human being and the defendant being the cause of that death. They've now gone forward and enlisted this terrorism component to a murder 1 indictment, which means they presented evidence in front of the grand jury, which is a group of 24 people from the community, without a judge in place, just a district attorney and a group of 24 grand jurors who hear evidence. It is undoubted, or I believe that the DA presented that alleged manifesto to try to get this terrorism charge added on as murder 1, but they're going to have a harder time proving that in court for one reason, and I'll make it fast. This victim was shot in the back of the head, not in the front of the head, on a quiet sidewalk, early in the morning, in the dark, and it doesn't appear from a defense attorney's perspective that this was intended to be a terroristic type of murder.
So one other thing I want to ask is just I want you to take a listen from moments ago, the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. Let's roll that tape.
1 count of murder in the first degree as a killing in furtherance of terrorism. 2 counts of murder in the second degree. 1 charging that the killing was done as an act of terrorism, and the second pertaining to the fact that the killing was intentional.
So, Stacey, you think a defense attorney would disagree with that and with what Shimon laid out, that the prosecution will explain is that because he was targeted, Mr. Thompson, for being a CEO of a health insurance company, and this does appear to be politically motivated in a sense, but you disagree with those charges, or you think a defense attorney would take issue?
I think his defense attorney is going to definitely take issue at trial. They may even move to dismiss the top count of murder one, and that would be Karen Agnifilio, because arguing this was a terroristic act when he was on a quiet street in the dark shooting a victim in the back of the head and then intending to influence the whole world about the insurance industry was an unintended consequence of this murder. No one expected the social media outpouring, the disturbing social media outpouring from this act. And to have the district attorney and law enforcement from New York mention that there was a social media outcry in relation to a terroristic act is putting the cart before the horse. I mean, the murder happened first, the outcry was second, and totally unpredictable. So I think this might be a case of overreaching on a murder one. I could see why they have enough evidence, or they believe, law enforcement, that they have enough evidence for murder two. But this is going to be a very interesting turn.
John Miller, I want to play for you. Listen to the NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch just moments ago.
The New York Post reported that some extreme activists were circulating a deck of cards with other most wanted CEOs to be targeted for assassination. These are the threats of a lawless, violent mob who would trade in their own vigilantism for the rule of law.
John Miller, what are you hearing from your NYPD sources about this? Are they going after the people who made these cards? Do they think these are serious threats?
Well, they do think that they are serious threats, and we're dealing across a number of domains here. One is the psychological effect and after effect that we see in this. Compare something like this, which is a relatively unique murder of the CEO of an industry because he was the CEO of the biggest company in that industry, in this case, healthcare. In school shootings, we see what they call the contagion effect, which is one of these things happens, it gets a great deal of attention, and the next person who was already thinking of something like that then may accelerate their plans. The idea that this has become a social media phenom, the idea that somebody has printed cards, the idea that just outside a high-level meeting of CEOs of a number of companies at a hotel last week, wanted posters of CEOs were posted on lampposts and scaffolding around the block showing their faces with their salaries underneath. Brian Thompson's was among them with an X across his face. The posters said, Brian Thompson's claim was denied, his claim to live. Whose claim will be denied next? This is the propaganda of terrorism, and this is in part why the Manhattan District Attorney charges the case this way. Now we know what they know, which is he had allegedly a manifesto on his person referring to these parasites in the plural, not the singular. What we don't know was, did Luigi Mangione have plans to kill more? But what Commissioner Tisch is trying to do here is sound a clarion call, an alarm, saying the NYPD and law enforcement in general will not tolerate this going from propaganda to action, and that they will track down who's ever responsible in any case.